Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll go. I was skipping through all that dialogue. Let me just save
Yeah.
here. Yeah, I'll go first. So yeah, this game, I've been meaning to play this game for a long time. And I I think that this game is like, how do I put it? What's the best way of putting it? It's
Don't do the death attacks in this place; they won't work.
okay. I'll it's basically flawless in what it's trying to do. This game is basically Phantasy Star 2, um, except with all the flaws fixed.
Macro F's a good one.
Okay, you know what? That went horribly bad, so I'm just gonna soft reset. I don't care because I saved right outside. Yeah,
Okay.
the game is flawless. In terms of like, it improved on Phantasy Star 2 in every way. Um, the graphics for the time are fantastic. You know that this game was on the Genesis. This is the best JRPG on the Genesis that there is. Um, I really love how detailed the enemies are, and I love the animations. They all look really good. Like if you compare this to games like on Final Fantasy, for example, Final Fantasy did not have this level of detail. Um, and the way it's able to tell a story is something that they use cutscenes basically, and that's a big deal because in a lot of other JRPGs, um, the way they tell a story is they have to just use dialogue boxes with no cutscenes, and that was due to technical limitations at the time that they just couldn't do it. They didn't have the technology to do all the stuff that we can do now with cutscenes, like voice acting and whatnot. This game, you know, it's able to use some cutscenes. It's able to use some static artwork to tell a story, and that the conveyance to the player is so much better for it. And that's something that Final Fantasy did not do. You know, all of Final Fantasy's story was told through dialogue boxes. They could do some facial expressions, um, but you know, it's no replacement for like real cutscenes. So, in my opinion, the way that this game conveys a story is so much better than Final Fantasy. Graphics-wise, I like this game more than the Final Fantasy games as well, because it has that kind of gritty look to it all. Like all the enemies, like I touched upon this a little bit before, but the enemy design's fantastic in this game. I think they all look so cool, and really that's a big thing for me, because that's the reason why I didn't like Dragon Quest VIII, because I just didn't like that cartoonish look in Dragon Quest. Like I don't know, some people like it, but for me, like the way the enemies look is important, and not only are the enemies well designed in this game, they're all animated. I mean, if you're looking at this right now, you can see like all three of these guys, like these guys on the sides, they have like flashing eyes, and the guy in the middle has that thing there, like I don't know, like his booty shaking or something like that. And it just looks cool. It just makes them feel more alive. And the Final Fantasy games, usually there's nothing. Nothing's moving. They don't really feel alive. They're just static pieces of art. And usually the art's pretty good, but you know, like having them being animated and even doing the attacks like that, some of the attack animations are really cool. Um, in fact, I love them. Some of the attack animations, especially the ones that are like in that what they're called time worms or whatever. Uh, how they're like kind of peeking behind, you know, like time and space itself to attack you. That's really cool. Um, so stuff like that, you know, like it really makes this game feel complete. Like there's really no way to improve upon this game. Um, now Here's the thing, though. It is a JRPG, and generally speaking, I think JRPGs are really dated by today's standards because most of them are very linear, which this game is. It is a linear game, which is different from Phantasy Star One, which is more in line with Final Fantasy One, which was heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons and had a big emphasis placed on exploration. So this game is more linear than those games, and because of that, that is a consequence of trying to tell a more coherent, cohesive story. It's a natural consequence of it, and that's okay. But then you have to like the story in order to really like the game. If you don't like the story, you're not gonna like the game. And in my opinion, a lot of these older JRPGs, they're just not able to tell a story nearly as well as a contemporary game can. Even though this game was cutting edge and broke new ground with its conveyance of telling a story using static cutscenes, it just, in my opinion, it can't tell a story as well as a modern game using voice acting and full animated cutscenes and having all the assets that we have today, with facial expressions and all that are fully animated. um, so you know streaming this game now, it's kind of hard for me to really understand the story. So I don't really know what's going on. Most of the time, I'm just asking Luke, what's going on. So I feel like I probably would like this game more if I played it again, um, offline, and just kind of like experience and really take in the story, and understand it all, because then I probably would like it more. But as it is right now, yeah, it's a little boring for me. I don't enjoy it that much. But again, that's really just a consequence of not being invested in the story and not really knowing what's going on. So that's really all I have to say. So Luke, do you have anything to say about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that's pretty fair. And I mean, certainly, I'm in agreement on all on the positives. Um, you know, the the graphics were very impressive for the time, and today I think there's still a good example of this particular style. There's games coming out these days with the retro style graphics, 16-bit and 8-bit graphics being made, and I think a lot can be taken from games like this in terms of making games to look like classic games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, you talked about the comparisons with the Final Fantasy games, and another thing I note that this game again did better. There were different character. There was different character art for the battles versus walking around on the overworld map. I remember with Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI, it's basically your map sprite that you see in battle,
Right.
and then they just kind of like move forward, and a sword appears and like wiggles, and that's your attack. In this game, you've got a bigger image of your character, and maybe not every single step gets displayed and animated, but you still get, they come forward, you get to see the whole figure, they swing a sword, they slash with a knife, whatever it is. So it's that's something that they didn't do with the Final Fantasy games, that I think makes the battles here more engaging,
Mm-hmm.
more exciting.
I agree.
Um,
I forgot to mention the sound. Do you want to talk about the music?
yeah. I mean, personally, I love the music in this game. Um, music on the Genesis, I find, is a divisive topic. People seem to hate it or love it, and there seems to be very little middle ground on it. And that has to do with the fact that it's FM synthesis.
Mm-hmm.
I really like music on a lot of Sega Genesis games, but this game, I think, has some of the best Sega Genesis music there is.
It kind of
The
has that like
sound,
rough sounding like kind of sound to it, similar to like Sonic Spinball. And I can understand some people wouldn't like it, but I like it.
yeah, yeah, and I think part of it depends on too how the music was made and what you're trying to think of with the music. A lot of the music in Sega Genesis games, and my perspective on it is just that this is electronic music. It's a bunch of synthesizers, not, oh, this is supposed to be a violin and this is supposed to be a guitar and this is a trumpet. Because, yeah, it can be disappointing if that's what you're expecting. The Super Nintendo did a better job of producing that kind of sound,
Hmm.
imitating that kind of sound, I should say. But if you just want really cool electronic sounds, the Genesis delivered on that. And this game, there's a lot of songs on here where they just went for cool electronic stuff, and they achieved it. In terms of sound effects, like there's nothing that really jumps out at me, but there's nothing that I hated with the sound effects. There's nothing that really made me laugh when it shouldn't have. Fantasy Star 2 did that,
Mm.
but yeah, yeah. As far as the story to the game goes, I think part of what's going on is that this playthrough is a little bit rushed, and a little bit paradoxically, if you were able to take your time a little bit more here, it might not feel boring because you could stop and find out what some of the characters in a village are saying. You could pay more attention to what is being said in some of the cutscenes and pick up some more of the details. Um, I mean, that might not make the difference for you,
Mm.
but um, it's possible that that would get you more invested in the story.
I
Um,
would have guessed, yeah, it probably would.
yeah, yeah. One of the scenes that's still yet to come, I think, also is pretty cool with where it gets into kind of the background of the the universe of these games, and without going into it too much right now, it like some of the characters even kind of start to even like address some like existential questions, which I think is pretty cool for like, oh, this is just an RPG from 1994. um but yeah, and I mean, it's not an absolutely perfect game, but I mean, does such a thing exist? Not really. The game achieves a lot of things really well. There's little stuff that I might change um here and there. I and some of it may just be matters of stuff of limitations of the hardware. Um, I feel like the item pack was a bit too limited. And I also kind of wish there was a way to sort it better. There's no way to sort it.
Mm.
Um,
Buying things, you have to buy them one at a
yeah,
time.
can't really see if it's gonna increase or decrease the stats. You're just kind of guessing. You don't know what a character's equipped with. When you're in the shop, you have to leave the menu and check your equipment. Um,
Yeah, little
I
things
know
like
there.
that. I mean, they could have improved it, but it would just like make it like a marginal improvement. It wouldn't really change like how I think the average gamer would feel about the game. It would just kind of make it. It would just make it a little bit better for the people who already like
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. And I know there was something else, um, but I just can't quite remember what now. I mentioned it'd be nice if the Hunters Guild would allow you to have more than one mission active at a time, because that would kind of save some back and forth in a few places. But again, I suspect that's some kind of limitation that they ran into with the programming. Um, I know something you actually said you wanted to talk about was the names of the techniques and skills, and
Hmm.
it certainly does get confusing. On the one hand, I can see where it makes things feel more mysterious and otherworldly. Like, oh, what's a Sar? What's a Gifu? Oh, what's Warla? But it's also at a certain point it gets hard to keep track of them.
It is.
But I mean, this game still remains one of my favorites. One of my top games, just overall.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. This game, yeah, I can definitely understand why people love this game. Uh, and Happy Console Gamer, that like he loves the Phantasy Star series, and like growing up with this game back in the day, uh, like this was the best kind of adventure game there was. There just weren't a lot of games that had like a good story and an adventure, an epic adventure like this. So with like lots of lands to explore and stuff like that. So this was the kind of game that you need, that was there for that. The question of whether or not it stands the test of time, in my opinion, I would assume that most new gamers probably wouldn't like it. People who didn't grow up with it probably wouldn't like it too much. But objectively speaking, for its time, it was great. It's just personally, I don't really like it too much. But, you know, I definitely don't disagree with people giving this game, very high scores, because I totally understand that.
yeah.
And that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Anything else to add, or are you done?
Um, I think that pretty much covers it for me.
Okay. All right, so that's it. That's the review. What does everyone else think about this game? Hey, Mexican. Sorry, Ali. I wasn't able to respond to what Ali said. Ali, so the ladder to your attic broke. So what happened? You said that there was a rat smell in the attic, and you went to investigate it, and you cut your hand falling down the ladder. How you doing, Mexican? Hello. Is it Duan? Doan? How you doing, Doan? Is it one of your favorite game series? Let's just attack this thing.
Yeah.
Doan.
I'm not so. And to respond to what Churka said up there, like I'm not saying Final Fantasy was bad, but like everybody loves Final Fantasy, and like Phantasy Star needs some love. And like I remember back in the day, like people would just like shit all over Phantasy Star. They never played it, but it wasn't Final Fantasy.
Hey, Orphic.
That was their reason.
Exactly. Yeah. Final Fantasy gets a lot of press.
Yeah.
But Phantasy Star doesn't.
Final Fantasy VI was a great game. It has amazing music. And it's and it's an epic storyline. But this is also an awesome game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.